when faced with difficult positions in life, where we see that we have no other option but to change, but this is unfamiliar territory, and so therefore our normal reaction, if we take the world to be a divisible thing and a divided thing, our normal reaction will be from a position where I have an I on the one side, an individual, plus all kinds of individual elements on the other side in the form of scenes and locations and opportunities or lack of opportunities and people and all these events coming up, and all put into a future tense whereby it leads to fear and doubt. Fear and doubt is an emotional thing. And so if the emotional reaction is a problem and stops us from comfortably moving into a changing scenario, then we have to counter it with another emotion. So somebody may say, well, it's a faith issue, I lack trust, but I know that God is there looking after me. That is just an academic statement. Or we have to be sure that it is not a real statement, that is in fact, when we look at it closely, just an academic understanding, a theoretical thing, an abstract thing. And so, if we really want to combat these obstacles, emotional obstacles, we have to put in and rally around positive emotions, thankfulness, love, connection. And that means that our spiritual life has to be connected, not just when we sit for prayer and meditation on a daily basis, but actually in the waking world, that area of consciousness that we talk about as the waking world. And that's the area where we can assert things. Now, when we assert things, do we have the free will to do it? And right away we have to say that this term free and will are incompatible terms. So I want to read something that Swami Vivekananda has put about this subject, because free will in that case, or when we look at this world, deterministic world, it is deterministic. One of our key points or a key beliefs, if you like, 5 aspects we are comfortable in believing as a united belief system. One is we believe in the authority of the Vedas or any other scripture which you are comfortable with, which you designate as scriptural. Well, in our case in Vedanta, we take the authority of the Vedas for a good reason, because there are none of the controversial elements within it, such as personalities, doctrines, dogmas. None of these are there in the Upanishads as pure practical philosophy. But philosophy has 2 broad components. The one component is, these are the principles. Another component is, well, these are the practices. And there's a disconnect if we're not careful between the 2. Because we find whole universities and books dedicated to philosophy. We could take all the Upanishads and study them in a scholarly fashion. We can take the Gospel of Christianity, we can take the Quran of Islam, we can take all of these texts and we can do intellectual gymnastics within all of them. We can do some text torturing and think we come to some kind of intellectual understanding, but is there a reality about it? People talk hundreds and hundreds of words about God, and they write thousands and thousands of books about it. But who has tasted God? Who has seen God? Who has experienced God? Who has connected with God intimately, so that we can say, yes, I know. This is my personal experience. I have a daily encounter with it, because I can see that presence inside everything, beaming back at me. And then I see a whole picture where the isolated world goes away and the division of me and mine and others goes away. Those principles have to be practiced to the extent that it becomes habitual, so habitual that fear doesn't arise, because fear and faith cannot coexist. They are poles apart. In fact, they're opposites. If I really trust in something, if I have great faith in it, then fear doesn't arise. And if I have a sense of oneness, fear doesn't arise, to the extent that our goal is described as abhaya, fearlessness. In fact, we take the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we find some very interesting characteristics. There, Krishna tells us in the Bhagavad Gita, 16th chapter, that by reading divine traits, demonic traits, that is, things which are binding to us and things which are freeing to us, we should find out characteristics. The first thing that he says is, Sri Bhagavan Ovacha, Abhayam Sattva Samsutir, Jnana Yoga Vyavastiti. The Lord said, fearlessness, purity of heart, steadfastness in knowledge, and concentration, yoga, charity, sense control, sacrifice, study of the scriptures, austerity, and uprightness. These are 9 characteristics he puts out. They're divine traits. And there are 3 stanzas like that, one after the other. These are the divine traits. It goes on, characteristics, a whole list, checklist if you will. Non-injury, truthfulness, absence of anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault-finding, compassion to all beings, non-covetousness, gentleness, modesty, absence of fickleness. And then it goes on with another 6. Overall, 26 traits. Strength, that is vigor, energetic attitude, forgiveness, fortitude, purity, absence of malice, and overbearing pride. They belong to one born for a divine state. We are all essentially born for a divine state, but we can take on the opposite kind of qualities. But I'll highlight again, the first thing that is mentioned is abhaya, fearlessness. If our goal is freedom, freedom means freedom from fear. Freedom from absolute freedom from anything, to the extent that if we were to make a definition of God, you might say like this. There's a passage in a talk that Swami Vivekananda gives called What is Religion? And in there, and it's part of his Bhakti Yoga, he says, the embodiment of freedom, the master of nature, is what we call God. It's a curious definition. Today, when there is much argument about atheism, theism, and all the rest of it, do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? There's an assumption by many people that a God is an extra-cosmic created God. Some even believe in deism. It means God, there was a supreme being who made the universe and then went on holiday and left it to its own devices. But here, Swami Vivekananda is making a very curious kind of definition. What is God? It is the embodiment of pure freedom, embodiment of freedom, and it is the master of nature. In other words, its presence, his presence, her presence, is responsible for the regularity and harmony of the whole universe, leading to a statement such as Jesus makes, you know what? The lilies of the field are clothed. The birds of the air, they are fed. And so it has to be a realistic attitude. What is a realistic attitude? It is going beyond this divisibility, this dividedness that somehow is entrenched in us, in our human biological nature. And in that case, we have to make sure that it is that we don't get caught in the trap, and that we are realistic in a sense to know what is what. And yet we are free, with a free attitude. There's a small story. Two men lined up for a criminal offense. They were friends, and they were in front of a firing squad. And one said to the other, do you think that we should ask for a last wish? Are we not entitled to the last wish? And his friend says, no, don't add to all the confusion. Don't add to the problem. That kind of thing. Don't make a scene, in other words, as if it makes any difference. So the embodiment of freedom, the master of nature, is what we call God. You cannot deny him. No, because you cannot move or live without the idea of freedom. Now, if you want a change in position or a change in circumstance, another way of saying it is, I'm looking for more freedom. There's this inherent drive within us that says we have to be free. We should struggle for our freedom. And so when we talk about free will, we're talking not simply of a decision making. Not at all. We're much more complicated than that. We have Swami Vivekananda saying something like this. He says, the Eastern philosophers accepted this doctrine. What doctrine? The doctrine of determinism, causal law, cause and effect. If I give people 5 things, firstly, we believe in the authority of the Vedas. Secondly, scripture, we have confidence in that. Secondly, that's the principles and the practice. Secondly, we believe in the eternal nature of nature itself that runs on causation. We accept it as a fundamental deterministic universe. And in philosophy, that has been debated for thousands of years, there are kind of 3 or so positions. One position would be that the world is fully deterministic. In other words, every time we ask why, we are assuming a cause somewhere, and then there's a cause of that, and it goes back forever, in which case the idea of any freedom in it doesn't make any sense. That's one position. Another position would be a libertarian position, which says, no, we have full freedom. We can assert it. And there is no determinism. And then there is another in-between position, they call compatibilism, that says, well, although there's a deterministic universe that has a causal effect, a causal law going on, still we feel the presence of free will. That's a fact. 2 facts that we cannot deny by experience, whether it's true or not, whether it's real or not, is that we feel that we are conscious beings. And secondly, we feel that we have a free will. Now, Ramakrishna gives a wonderful story. He says, imagine that you have a calf and you give it a big field, but you're tying it to a post. You give it long enough rope so it can eat grass nicely in the meadow. It thinks it's free. It doesn't know it is tethered. So when we say freedom and will, these are actually different contradictory terms. It's a paradox because a will is a deterministic thing and there's no freedom within it, even though we may experience it. And of course, we can better understand it by changing the term and saying free choice. We have a free choice. Where does this freedom come from? It doesn't come from the will level. It comes from the fundamental free level. In other words, we ourselves are fully free, fully perfect, and it is that freedom that comes through and asserts itself as the capacity to choose, to decide. And so, Eastern philosophers, says Swami Vivekananda, accepted this doctrine. In fact, they propounded it, that the mind and the will are within time, space, and causation, the same as so-called matter, and that they are therefore bound by the law of causation. We think in time, our thoughts are bound by time. All that exists in time and space. All is bound by the law of causation. If such a doctrine, he says, had been introduced in olden times into a Western community, it would have produced huge, tremendous commotion. Because the Western man, he says, doesn't want to think his mind is governed by law. But in India, it was accepted. As soon as it was propounded, the most ancient Indian system of philosophy, and there is no such thing as freedom of the mind, it cannot be. Why didn't this teaching create any disturbance then in the Indian mind? It was received very calmly, and that is the speciality, of course, of Indian thought as such, wherein it differs from every other thought of the world. What is it? It is only when we identify ourselves with the body that we say, I am suffering, I am so-and-so, all such nonsense. But he who has known the truth holds himself aloof. Whatever his body does, whatever his mind does, he doesn't care. But mind you, he says, the vast majority of mankind are under this delusion, and whenever they do any good, they feel that they are the doers. But they are not, because the real doership, the real prophet-actor complex, is not contained within the space-time bound ego, sense of I, identification with a body and a personality. So they are not yet, those people who are putting this agency, they are not able to understand a higher philosophy. And okay, don't disturb their faith. They're shunning evil and doing good. It's a great idea. Let them have it. They are workers for good, but by degrees they will think there's a greater glory than that of doing good, maybe being God, good. They will only witness and things are done. So I have to get into position, disembodied position. I am the witness of all of this. That is where my freedom is. And that manifests, filters through as a determinative faculty, which in our Sankhya system is only an echo, actually, of this full glory that comes out. It shines, a bit like the sun shining or making its reflection in a big tank of water. The tank of water is not the sun. Similarly, the intellect is just a kind of mechanism. It has a function, no doubt. But its seeming intelligence comes from what stands behind, which is truly full and truly free. Now that's a part of the devotional life which evokes a feeling. And that feeling overcomes fear because within that there's only oneness. Fear only comes when there are two or more things separate. So Vivekananda carries on. The only way left to us is to admit first that the body is not free, neither is the will, but that there must be something beyond both mind and body which is free. And he carries on, he says, we see at once that there cannot be any such thing as free will. The very words are contradiction, because will is what we know, and everything that we know is within our universe, and everything within our universe is molded by the conditions of, yes, space, time, causation. Everything that we know or can possibly know must be subject to causation. And that which obeys the law of causation cannot be free. It is acted upon by other agents and becomes a cause in its turn. Now, Swami Vivekananda was very much aware of the writings of Schopenhauer. And Schopenhauer, a great philosopher, German philosopher, was keen, with the Upanishads in front of him, developing his philosophy, to assert that everything is due to will and making will the absolute. but it cannot be, as we have seen. Nevertheless, there is a willing aspect, cosmological aspect, that is a directing thing, and that means that everything that comes from it is directed. Now we have to be a little bit technical, be a little bit more modern, and look at some modern physics. There is a big confusion about the deterministic world, where in its extreme you cannot have any free will, because everything is determined. Even some religious systems will say it is so, and it creates something called fatalism. It's all due to the will of God. You have no will of your own. Well, as some of you may have suggested, you may as well just say, okay, let me be lazy and not will anything and leave it to everything else. No, there's a functional aspect that is able to tap into a higher will. Let us reframe this as cosmic mind. Cosmic mind is our word for God. You have to understand in our system that there has to be a scale up. What happens on the microcosmic level happens on the macrocosmic level. What does that mean? I, as an individual, may think, I have a body, I have a mind, and within that mind there are various parts. All right, so far so good. Now, we are made in the image and likeness of, let us call it God. So what does it mean? It means the whole cosmos is that. It's not an extra cosmic creator God, something like that. No, it is the whole idea of a cosmic will directing and moving something, starting off from what we call vacuum. What do we mean by vacuum? Turns out it's a highly dense area, invisible, but what is visible is the effects of comings and goings. The great physicist John Wheeler had called it quantum foam. I always imagine it like something, a glass of Irish Guinness. So there's something like a vacuum which contains a potentiality from which everything can come. And then what is this vacuum? Is it an empty thing? Is it a material thing? It's much more subtle than that. And what we see it as a subtlety is the origin of what we might call quantum fields. But if we take one thing, just a holistic approach, we will understand it's not as if there was many fields. They're all just different variations of one entire whole field. We think of it like that. And where's it coming from? It's coming from one consciousness. And free will is the other side of consciousness. Consciousness and free will, that is the cosmic will, cosmic free will be one and the same thing. Because of that determination, things happen and manifest in a material way as tables and chairs and you and me and so on, and job opportunities and decision making that follows. Now, when we trace it back, we say, how can we change our reality? How can we change our universe? It starts off by mobilizing this cosmic thing called thought, something called God's grace flowing continuously within us, through us, if you will, and us standing back in that free will and seeing this flow and saying, here it is, Lord, please flow this way, please flow that way. We can individually make a choice about it. Without that, how can there be any moral positions? Morality is not there if we're not able to determine and resolve, I'll change my thinking. I'll reform my habit level. But we have to understand that it looks as if we are doing it. But we are only taking our inherent freedom that is echoed in this unit called buddhi, if you like, or determinative faculty, and making a choice. And what choice will we make? Well, we have, broadly speaking, two avenues that we can choose from for our benefit. We're not just making individual choices and decisions, but we have to look at the Katha Upanishad. And the Katha Upanishad tells us about two ways, two paths. Well, if we are presented with two options, and I say we are presented with it, that means it exists previously, and we are simply reacting to it. With that reaction that we call, mistakenly probably, free will, much better probably to say free choice. We can choose this or we can choose that. And so when somebody is struggling and say and telling me that the cause is something external, then I will say, change your choice. It is your choice. We are all subject to our own choice. The world that is presented in front of us is something that we chose, wittingly or unwittingly, previously. We used a determinative faculty and we went with it. It was a reaction. If I want to move a chair from one place to the other, A to B, a chair pre-existing must be there first. It's a conditional thing. Understanding that limitation, at the deeper level, there is a free will that is operating, same thing as pure consciousness is operating. And what we call free will at that level is that consciousness wanting to know itself, and that filters down to us and creates a desire in us for freedom, which is so basic to us. This search for freedom, this desire for freedom is there. That is because our nature is already free, and we're looking to get back, we're looking to do away with these obstacles toward it so that this consciousness can flow through. So, what are these two ways presented by Yama, the Lord of Death, to Nachiketa in the Katha Upanishad? It says, different is the good, different is the pleasant. These two, with the different purposes, bind a person, what we call Shreyas, Nishas, Shreya. These two, with the different purposes, bind a person, and of these two, it is well for him who takes hold of the good, but he who chooses the pleasant fails of his aim. What does that mean? Well, it's a test, of course, of Nachiketa, who is offered the pleasant things. What are the pleasant things? Well, we can have as much food as we like. And if we can't have it here, then some theologies say, never mind, you'll have it in a post-mortem world. After this world, you'll have another one where there is infinite chocolate or whatever it is, and fruit and all the rest of it. Whatever you want is there. All the pleasures are there. You can have it in this life or the next life, as you choose. And what does Nachiketa do? He changes that. He says, no, thank you. Absolutely no. I choose something else. All these pleasures are set out. You're going to have power in the world. You can satisfy all the senses as much as you want. But quite rightly, Nachiketa is using his determinative faculty and saying, well, I've looked at that. I've thought about that. And these are all finite things. They will all pass. They won't give me what I'm looking for, what you and I are all looking for, and that is pure freedom. Because, as Swami Vivekananda defines it, what is God? God is the embodiment of freedom. Even an atheist will say, I don't believe in God, but do you believe in freedom? Do you believe there's an ideal for freedom? Why do you want your freedom? Why is it that nobody wants to be enslaved? Why is it nobody wants to be bound? The central story in the Abrahamic religion of the exodus of the Jewish people going from Egypt, whether it happens historically or not is beside the point. It is in any event an allegorical tale of going from slavery to freedom, going slavery to bliss, the land of milk and honey, and spending 40 years in the desert. In other words, going through the dryness of the world first, until ultimately, yes, we have it. And we have to take the journey, as it were. It looks like a journey. So Even Plato would be telling us that in every one of us, there are two ruling and directing principles whose guidance we follow wherever they may lead. And the one being an innate device of pleasure, and the other an acquired judgment which aspires after excellence. Now these two principles at one time maintain harmony, while at another they are at feud with us. And now one and now the other obtains mastery. And this is quoted from Phaedrus. Both the good and the pleasant approach a person, both of these. The wise person pondering over them discriminates, and the wise chooses the good in preference to the pleasant. It's otherwise called the path of the pleasurable or the preferable. The simple-minded, for the sake of worldly well-being, prefers the pleasant. But what does this mean? It means that we are using a certain assessment. What is good for us, what is not. We're making a decision on it, and we're making a free choice and choosing morality. That is the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, characterizing these are the moral things, moral characteristics. These are the binding immoral characteristics. And studying that, you'll surely choose the moral ones. Why? Because the goodness, the preferable, leads to clearing the way of freedom, accessing our inherent freedom, which Swami Vivekananda has already defined as God. Not only is that, but it's a governing entity, giving us, if we think of it in this way, everything they want. And the philosophical term for it is a cosmic mind. Cosmic mind that we can tap into by steering our thought, and it has no favorites, even though it may have a regulating will, no doubt, that comes out as this world. So the whole unity of existence, spirit, Brahman, God, whatever you like to call it, has three characteristics. It's dynamic, it's holistic, it's only one, and it wants to know itself. Hence the search for self-knowledge. Even science is doing it. And so the consciousness and free will are the same thing. And it comes out in the physical world as a potentiality, a kind of vacuum with a quality of only one. Only one thing is there. It's a number one is there. And it is knowing, it is existing, and knowledge and existing are the same thing, two sides of the same coin, just like one cell dividing, or like, if you will, colors on a wheel, which only have three colors basically, but there are intermediaries going on. In the same way, there's a structure starting from vacuum energy, this quantum form, this Guinness, as it were, with bubbles rising and disappearing, which has such a density of activity, but unseen by us, and then manifesting through a will, manifesting in a more concrete way as what we might call quantum fields, what we really call in our language tanmatras, subtle elements that combine, recombine. They are essentially wave systems, and they cross a kind of border, and the border then becomes physical, deterministic, the deterministic universe. But underneath it is pure indeterminism. You get the idea. In the quantum world, there's indeterministic. It's called probability. But in the expression of it, where we have eyes to see it, and where we measure things properly, and when we bring in space and time, when we bring in these dimensions, then what will happen? Naturally, this will all be condensed into this so-called word of ours, which is a state of consciousness called a waking state. And that waking state looks as if it's all divided. And the mistake is to go from the divided, the parts, in other words, to find out what is the whole. Instead of going from the whole, and seeing what the parts look like. That's our mistake. So, what does all this mean? We go to the whole first. That is what we call God. Conveniently giving us the opportunity, the condensed opportunity, if you will, of a form, a name, and a real entity that has a willing aspect, a directing aspect, that at its fundamental holistic level is called pure existence, pure consciousness, and bliss. That, accessing that, going toward that, is the reflection of that free will into our area where it looks like free will, but really when we examine it is within the confines of time and space and causation, and there's no such thing, but it looks like it. Why should it look like it? Because behind it is real freedom. That's why. So we can have these various ideas and make all these argumentative determinations about what is free will, but the fact is we experience it. And therefore it's purely academic. Experiencing it, we take advantage of it and make the right choices. And so we are compatibilists in that sense. We say, well, yes, there cannot be free will since there is a determinism going on. And we also won't go along with Schopenhauer that understands this causal relationship, but puts the will as a supreme thing. This was Swami Vivekananda's chief criticism, really, of Schopenhauer and his philosophy. As I said before, Schopenhauer develops his philosophy with the Upanishads in front of him. And he recognizes the Upanishads as the very highest in human philosophy ever, in the human thinking and valuation ever. So, the way it's laid out is that there is and Swami Vivekananda puts this out in his Jnana Yoga lectures. In a lecture called The Absolute and the Manifestation, because we have this, and he draws it out, that there is an absolute. You can imagine at the top, the supreme, the source of everything, pure spirit, absolute. Absolute means no space, no time, no change, no causation. And then from that absolute will come time, space, causation. Within that framework, we have these vacillating waves. And because time and space, we know from our modern physics, 20th century physics, that space and time is the same thing. We call it together space-time. And so that is why, you see, when you try and see what is happening, you come across Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. You can only measure a probability of something because we think in individual particles. We think in divided things, divisible units. And somehow it's difficult to get away from the concept. But actually, it's all waves of different frequencies and different combinations. And therefore, we should not be just surprised when we see wave-like behavior where we cannot pin down the activity. We don't know where it's going to arrive. It's present everywhere. And then when we have a quandary, the quandary in this quantum physics, this underlying physics, what we might call is the physics of tanmatras, these subtle elements. Then when we try to see, well, you know what? There is this thing called entanglement. If you just hooked into the classical world, you won't like it. This entanglement will tell us that everything actually is most likely non-local. That means that it can be a change here once the two particles have met. A change here, like spin, will immediately have the effect on its partner. And there are maybe some theories of variable factors involved in it. I won't go into the technicalities of it. But when you see everything as waves, you'll understand there's only one thing there. There's only one essential field which is there, divine field which is there. And all these categories of waves are combinations of that, and all driven by a free will. That means we can reverse engineer it, so to speak, by cultivating our thought in this world through the capacity of our imagination, in glorious technicolor visualizing every single detail of it with the full confidence that is expressed in Jesus' language. Jesus' language would say, believe it's already accomplished. There's an episode there. Jesus gives some curse to a fig tree, it withers, the disciples are amazed about it, and he's telling them, greater things than this can you do. If you say to that mountain, move, it'll move. They're wide-eyed and disbelieving, but they have faith in their master. But then he gives the key. Believe that it is already accomplished. Believe that it is already accomplished. When you see that what you call thought, what you call the flow of feelings and all that, it's a flow of grace coming through the mental field. Take that, grasp it as an opportunity and give it some shape. What is the shape? Whatever you want in glorious technicolor. And you can use any support thing to help it out, such as writing it down, drawing a picture. What I do is I get people to take a cloth and I give them a yantra and get them to sew all that. And that means with every stitch, they're putting a thought in. And what that thought does, thought is a suction, it mobilizes the whole series of tanmatras going up to its source, namely that pure free will, cosmic free will, called cosmic mind. And then it goes the other way. It crystallizes your thought, going through all the various quantum fields called tanmatras, and crystallize it as in your waking state as what you unfortunately call a reality. Why do we say unfortunately? Well, it's fortunate in one way, in the way that we have to deal with this drama called a waking state and all its circumstances. But it's unfortunate if we don't understand that it is not actually a reality in the sense that we would normally think of. What do we mean by that? Well, there is something called invariance. That is, when we look at this classical world, that is people and places and events, this waking world, it would be difficult to see something that is constantly invariable from all reference points. And Einstein knew this, he brings in special relativity and so on and so forth. We don't want to get too technical about this, but just suffice to say that we cannot really say this is absolutely real. It's more like a dream thing. We take it to be real. Our instinct is it's real. Our gut says it's real. Our fears seem to be real. Our doubts seem to be real. The circumstances appearing to us seem to be real. But then we forgot that this is only one phase of consciousness. The other phases will be a dream, a similar state to a waking state, with all the characteristics of a waking state, except increased possibilities. And then a blank, as it were, a peaceful state, a state of potentiality, which we call a deep sleep. And from a deep sleep, we can mobilize that potentiality, which we might call a vacuum state, and mobilize it as these various components, the Tanmatra world, the world of experience, subjective experience, qualia, and so on and so forth. And then that goes back to the primary mover. It goes back to God, what we call cosmic mind here. Cosmic Christ, cosmic Buddha, cosmic Ramakrishna, cosmic Krishna. Call it what you will. Call it the golden womb, Hiranyagarbha. Call it the cosmic Christ. call it whatever term you like, there is only one mind. And one mind is there behind it, working its way outward, seeking expressing its freedom and suggesting, if you think you're a dividedness, please look for your inherent source, your nature, which is freedom itself. That's the whole purpose of life. In doing this, we can shape our universe, shape the events, as long as it is not an overriding thing from the cosmic will, because some things are not possible. What are those? Well, if I decide my nose, when I look in the mirror, I'm thinking this would look much better sewn on the back of my head, and the ears should be switched around. Well, that's not going to happen. It's not meant like that. It'll be dysfunctional. And the world runs through harmony. The world is designed to run in a rhythm and an order. And it runs on birth, life, and death. And it also runs on frustration. Yes. So this is what we call the imperfect world, in one word, nature. Nature is like that, but nature can be harnessed. So we harness nature to get what we want with this faith and confidence. All will be well. Why? Because it's well in the first place. It was never not well. Anyway, you see, we have to understand and impress it. This is Swami Vivekananda in his Jnana Yoga lectures, the absolute in manifestation, and impress it on our minds that what we call causation begins after, if we may be permitted to say so, the degeneration, we can be forgiven for using the word, of the absolute into the phenomenal, this world, and not before that. Our will, our desires, and all these things always come after that. Then he says, I think Schopenhauer's philosophy makes a mistake in its interpretation of the Vedas or the Vedanta, for it seeks to make the will everything. Schopenhauer makes the will stand in the place of the absolute. But the absolute cannot be presented as will, for will is something changeable and phenomenal, and over the line, that he, in other words, absolute time-space causation is a line, a universe is another line, that over the line, drawn above time and space and causation, there is no change, no motion. It is only below the line that external motion and internal motion, called thought, begin. There can be no will on the other side, and will therefore cannot be the cause of this universe. Coming nearer, we see in our own bodies that will is not the cause of every movement. I move this chair, my will is the cause of this movement, and this will becomes manifested as muscular motion at the other end. But the same power that moves the chair is moving the heart, the lungs, and so on, but not through will. It's an involuntary movement that's taking place. Given that the power is the same, it only becomes will when it rises to the plane of consciousness, and to call it will before it has risen to this plane is a misnomer. This makes a good deal of confusion in Schopenhauer's philosophy. And then he goes on, a stone falls and we ask why. This question is only possible on the supposition that nothing happens without a cause. So, what he's saying is that the absolute, whose presence has made a kind of degeneration, as it were, into the phenomenal world, that comes first, and that is not a willing thing, it's an absolute, because it has no time, no space, no causation. It is not in the phenomenal world, the absolute there and the phenomenal world below it. The will comes out in the latter. That doesn't stop us using it. The body comes in the latter. That doesn't stop it from using it. The world in which we see and hear and touch and taste and so on and so forth is a part of it. It doesn't stop us from eating and drinking and working. That's the idea. So take this lesson that we can be architects of our own future by asserting our so-called free choice, making sure that on the one hand it's leading to this access of freedom, and on the other hand it is also, as a useful step toward it, exercising our freedom in the phenomenal world, more freedom I would say, by molding it creatively according to how we mobilize thought in a willing way. All right, we'll leave it there, I think, and I hope that is useful. A little complicated, I suppose, but anyway, I hope you pick something from it.
Thank you, Swamiji.
All right. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.